It's okay if I have notes? Good evening, everybody. I'm John. I'm an alcoholic. So the other day, Harris came up to me and he asked me to be a speaker, and my first reaction was kind of holy crud, because that's not my comfort zone. But you know, when somebody in AA asks you to do something, you feel somewhat obliged to do it. And the only caveat I had was I said, you know, Harris, I don't have a lot of time as a sober person. You know, I'm coming up on a year, and I just question whether my story was really of that much merit to people that might have a lot of sobriety. But I then thought for a little bit. Now, of course, my sponsor said, John, you need to somebody should check that out. So Harris checked, and apparently it's okay that somebody doesn't have to have 30 years of sobriety to speak here. So I said, oh crap, so okay. So anyway, so I'm very happy and I'm very honored to speak here tonight, because this is an important thing. It's important hopefully for you, but it's important for me to share my story and really express, you know, what it's meant to me to come from sort of a place of real desperation and become a sober person. And what it's meant to people in my life that have depended on me and saw me really fall from a really good place to a very desperate and a very not a good place. So, again, I'm very happy to talk tonight. I guess the first thing that came to mind when I started, you know, when the thought came to me that I might actually have to speak here tonight was experience, strength, and hope. You know, that's basically all I have. That's all I have to offer anybody. That's all that I feel like, you know, that I can really give anybody. And so I guess the first thing I'd like to talk about is hope, you know, because in a lot of ways that was my introduction to AA, you know. Before I decided to become a sober person, you know, it's really shocking how you can live for a long period of life, somewhat a normal life, and still be an alcoholic. In fact, sometimes I really honestly believe that I was an alcoholic long before I started drinking. You know, and I don't know if you can appreciate that, but certainly certain behavior patterns in my life probably led me to become an alcoholic in the first place. But I do remember you know, I'd gone from a person that had enjoyed a bottle of wine or more just about every night for a good 20 years. And I'll go into more detail, but then I retired from the company I'd been working for. And it seemed like my life started spiraling. And it really got to a place where a bottle of wine wasn't enough, and maybe even 2 bottles sometimes, and then I moved on to drinking more, just anything I could find. And there had become a point of obsession for me that was almost indescribable. And to that end, you know, I really became in the grips of what I consider hopelessness. You know, I was hopeless. And the interesting thing, how I kind of saw it in life, was there was this very thin dividing point between hopelessness and what might be hope. But I didn't have a solution. And so a week before I actually came into the Wilder building and entered my first meeting at AA, I had a terrible week. I was literally in the hospital twice, you know, because of my alcoholism. I had to go up to Detroit to meet a client, and I was shaking so bad in the presence of that client. It was embarrassing, but I really didn't understand what was going on in my physicality. You know, I'd go back to the hotel at night, and I would drink, and finally I flew home that Friday night. And my wife, God bless my wife, because she, as much as anybody saved me, she saved me. She had been involved years before. We lived in Cincinnati, and that was my first time I started with Ford Motor Company, and she took a job. She was a teacher, and she really couldn't find a job right away, and she wanted to get involved in teaching, so she took a job at at a teenage rehabilitation center as a teacher that interfaced it between the school system and the center. And she became familiar with AA, right? And so that Friday night when I came home, she understood what I was experiencing, and she just simply said, again, I can't describe the amount of desperation I was in. I mean, literally at nights I would sneak out of the bed, I'd go down, I'd drink something somewhere hidden in my house. We went to the AA meeting over at the Wilder building, okay, and I entered the room, I breached the door, I came into the room, and they said basically, are there any new people, or are people here for the first time? And just by my nature, I stood up and said, I'm John, I'm an alcoholic. And that's the first time I actually ever admitted it out in public. And I went through the meeting. I don't really remember much. I was a wreck. But at the end of the meeting, a good friend of mine came up to me. His name's Pat. And he said, John, we're glad you're here. You're welcome, and please come back. And I went from this state of hopelessness to this most tiny, tiny, tiny seed of hope, where I felt like I could go forward. And I started coming to meetings, And the amazing thing about hope, and at least in my mind, is that it almost has like a magnetic characteristic to it. On one side of hopelessness, it was pulling me in the direction of despair and misery. And once I felt that tiny seed of hope inside me, I all of a sudden felt the pull to go to a much more brighter, much more lighter side. And I can't say that I felt it immeasurably, but I definitely changed. Something changed inside of me. And so I started coming to meetings. And I'll talk about that in a second. But that's where my life changed, on that day that I entered the Wilder building and decided that and it was a solution. That was the key for me. The key was, up until that point, I didn't have a solution. I didn't know what to do. All I knew was I was an alcoholic. I was miserable. My life was, I knew if I continued down this path, it was to no good. So that one night, that one day, absolutely changed my life forever. And I didn't become instantaneously a sober person, but I started down the path. So that's kind of the start of my story. Let me make sure my phone's not on. Sorry about that. So really, to tell my story, I guess for me, to be quite frank about it, I really need to talk a little bit about my father, all right? Because I'm sure he was a good man. I didn't really know him a huge amount, but I'll tell you a little bit about his story. And then maybe I can then talk a little bit more about mine. My father, his name was Burness, right? Unusual name. He grew up in a little town in South Georgia called Thomasville. And Thomasville was not unlike, Southern Pines or Pinehurst. It used to be a place where people from the north came and spent their winters. So it's a very quaint little town and quite lovely. But my father, he came from a poor family. So he went to high school there. He graduated. And it was in the 1920s, and so he graduated around 1939, 1940, and he went into the Army, right? And so he went in, the war wasn't going on, but not too long afterwards he found himself in North Africa, and he was fighting the Germans, and he spent time there, went through Italy, then went on to England, and they rested for a while. He wasn't involved in the invasion. But then he followed the invasion and then went through Europe. So literally he spent about 2 years in combat. So he had a tough go of it. But he survived. And I have this packet of letters that he wrote home to his parents during the course of his time overseas. And there's a lot of hope in those letters. Literally he would not write about what he was experiencing, but what he was really appreciated when he had time to go back into the reserves and rest, and then obviously he'd have to go back and do the things he had to do, being a soldier and being over in Europe at the time. But he made it through. He got through, He came back to the States. He got the VA benefits, went to college, right? He met my mom, graduated, started in business, and was successful, had 3 children, and then he went on and he drank himself to death, all right? And it's kind of tragic that a good man could do that to himself, but he didn't have a solution. Somewhere during the middle of all of that, my mom, who, this was back in the early 60s, realized that she couldn't spend her time with this man, and she decided to leave him, right? And so she went home to her parents' house down in South Miami. That's my grandparents. And really, that's kind of where my life started. That's where my memories of my life started. I have some memories of my mom and dad, but very few. I was young. I was probably 5, something like 5 or 6. So we go back, and so basically I grew up in South Miami. My grandfather, who was a great man, I love him very much. He really guided me in my early life. He had mango and avocado groves down in South Miami, which was paradise for me, for a kid. And he was quite popular for having done that. He started building mango and avocado groves in the early 20s and done that really his entire life, and built them, he sold them, he kept some, he sold them. And so it was, he was quite experienced in that. He taught me that. I learned growing up as a kid all there is to know about, you might call it farming, we call it growing, but that was the early part of my life. And then probably about the time I was, 13, this was, I was introduced to, not so much drinking, but introduced to marijuana and those kind of things. And I really enjoyed that as a kid. It was fun. It was kind of the thing to do. And so that's kind of what I did in my early ages. I didn't really think at the time that there was anything wrong with it. It was almost like getting away with something, right? And so we did this for a while, and something happened to me in high school that kind of altered that. And that a friend of mine, that they started a program down in South Miami. It was called the Seed, and you didn't voluntarily go there. They generally sent you there. And part of the deal was a rehabilitation program, right? But at the same time, you ratted out your friends and basically told on who else was in that sort of category of getting high and maybe drinking and things like that. And so my friend came back, and he was, he wasn't my best friend, but he was a good friend. We'd ride the bus together. I'd sit with him a lot. And when he came back, he never talked, right? And he just sat in silence. And for about 2 weeks, I rode on the bus with him, and he didn't talk. And I didn't know what to say to him. And after about 2 weeks, he went home and he killed himself. And that was very disturbing to me. And I realized that, number one, that this place called the Seed was not a place I wanted to go. And so I convinced my parents at the time that it'd be a good idea if I maybe go away to military school, right? So I went with, I had a friend out there. So the school was out in New Mexico. It's called New Mexico Military Institute. So I went to school out there. I convinced my mom. I had a friend out there who had gone, and he had told me that it was a fantastic place. John, you got to come out here. And so I convinced my parents. They said, okay, it's not a bad idea. So I went to a military academy out in New Mexico. And it didn't turn out to be all that I thought it was going to be. I thought you might get a little haircut. You may have to wear a uniform on occasion, but they were pretty serious about the military business out there. And but I went out there, and I had sort of changed my habits from being a kid that was having a good time and not really serious about life, getting high, but to where I kind of fit into this environment in a military environment. And and I enjoyed it. So I went there for 4 years. I went there and I guess I learned that how to manage things, how to work with people in a position of leadership. I learned how to, maintain good order and be responsible and just generally good principles in life. So I come from a kid that really wasn't very guided to a person that was somewhat well-behaved, well-managed, had perspective on life, and thought I could achieve. So I went there 4 years, and they had a program. It was an officer's program, and you went through 2 years of, I guess you call it ROTC, and I got a commission. So I came out of there as a sophomore in college, and I got a commission in the military. But then I went on and finished the rest of my college out in Texas. So my life was looking pretty good from a lot of perspectives, So I finished my degree at Texas Tech University. I had a 3-year obligation in the military. It was a good time. It was 1980. There were no jobs. So I thought, okay, so I'll do this for 3 years. So I went on active duty, and for some reason, that very first day I went to Fort Sill, some friends of mine came up to me that had been friends of mine in military school, and they said, "John, you want to get high?" And I said, "Yeah, let's go." So that night I went out with them, and we went out in town. We had some drinks, had a good time. We were sort of not particularly careful, and we were driving back to the base. And on the dashboard was a bunch of marijuana. I was driving the car. At the guard post, they pulled us over. They came up. They searched the car. My very first day in the military, I was in the brig, and I was just panicked. But I don't know why. Some reason they decided not to throw me out of the Army. So I ended up going ahead and finishing my officer's program out at Fort Sill. Yeah. And getting posted over to Fort Jackson. But that pattern of getting high re-entered my life. So for all that time that I kind of got past it, it re-entered my life. So I spent 3 years in the Army with my friends, and we spent the whole time getting high. Now, I wasn't particularly a drunk. I didn't drink that much, but I got high. All right, and maybe I shouldn't talk about it that way in this meeting, but maybe this is not about that. But in a lot of ways, that was sort of what caused me to become an alcoholic. So I managed to get through. I spent 3 years in the Army. I guess I had good interpersonal skills, and I was able to manage my way through. But certainly I wasn't doing the right thing. And there was a little seed inside of me that told me that, that moral compass that was telling me, "John, this is not how you should be leading your life." But I didn't pay too much attention to it. I became sort of just, anyway. So I leave the military, and by some stroke of luck, right, I get a job with Ford Motor Company, right? So I've left the military. I've managed to get out without too much harm done. Still getting high. I go to work for Ford Motor Company, and I start in somewhat of a regional position. I'm working in the field. I'm calling on dealers. I have responsibility. I've met my wife by now, Catherine, and she has moved up to Cincinnati with me, and we get married, and I start progressing in the company. I moved from field positions to somewhat local level management positions, and on a career basis, I'm doing pretty good. But I'm starting to drink, and I'm still getting high, and inside me, all that's telling me is this is not the right path, John. You're not doing the right thing. But nothing's stopping me. I'm still doing pretty good with the company, and I actually get promoted out to Kansas City. And so basically what I did with Ford, I ran sort of at first I ran sort of regional, like or district areas, and those were, I had a block of dealers I'd call on that I was responsible for. And when I moved out to Kansas City, I became sort of more of they called them districts, I guess, districts at the time. And I started moving up in the management area within the company in the district level, still getting high. My drinking patterns now have become almost routine, Every night I'd have a drink. I look forward to going out Friday nights with my friends after work, and we'd have drinks. Then we'd start drinking during the week. When I traveled, I would drink. Every night, I sort of had a need to have something to drink, right? That was becoming my life pattern. But I'm still doing good in the company. So a few golden moments happen, and all of a sudden they asked me one time to move up to Detroit. That's where our headquarters are, up in Dearborn. And I get a great job. I have an advertising job with Ford Motor Company. I am the dealer advertising manager for one of the divisions. Have a good budget. I'm only 32 years old. My career is on fire. I am doing exceptionally well by a lot of standards. People like me. My wife loves me. Everything in my life should be going in the right direction, But I'm still continuing to drink. So I moved from that position. I take on a position. One day my boss comes to me. It's ridiculous. He says, "John, we want you to be the motorsports manager for a division." So I had responsibility for NASCAR and NHRA for one of the divisions. And how great of a job was that? I got to meet fascinating people and really explore things that I'd never had experience for. I knew nothing about motorsports. In fact, the amazing thing about that job is they wanted somebody that had no familiarity with NASCAR or NHRA or motorsports. And the reason they did is because the guy that had the job before me was a fanatic. And by the time he was done, he had the company that built our, I forget what they call them. There were the show cars that he had them build two and build the company for one, and then one of them ended up in his garage. Right? And so that turned out to be a small disaster. So they wanted somebody not particularly excited about motorsports, and I was that person. So I did that for 3 years, about 2 years. I'm 35 years old. I have the best job on the planet. I'm meeting guys that are just the salt of the earth. They love to drink. Let's have a drink, John. And that's what we did. Every night, wherever I was, some racetrack somewhere, we were out drinking. You see the pattern. So I'm in this job for about 3 years, or 2.5 years, and my boss comes up to me and he says, "John, we want you to go launch Ford Korea. Literally start Ford Korea from scratch. Ford doesn't have any presence in Korea." I am 35 years old. I think that's the most insane thing anybody's ever asked me to do. So I asked, my manager's name was Pat, and I said, "Pat, is there a cookbook for that?" And he says, "No, John, but you'll do fine." So me and my wife pack our bags, never been outside the country except maybe to Canada, and I'd been to Mexico, have no experience with what it's like to go and try to do business in another country. And we moved to Korea. We pack all our bags. We think, the amazing thing about being stupid about foreign countries is you think you know what you're going to do when you get there. You think you understand the culture is going to be exactly what it's like where you're from. And what you discover is it's not. And So my wife said, we sat on a bed and we looked at a map on our bed, and we tried to say, we're going to live there and we're going to have this kind of a house and all that. We sort of mapped all that out, and we get to Korea and it's an entirely different place. They don't speak English. Whoa, that's a big surprise. And but we get settled there, and believe it or not, as crazy as it seems, I actually adapted to the situation pretty well. I did okay. I managed in the time frame that the ridiculous time frame they gave me to do this, to set up Ford Korea. They gave me about 5 months to do everything, to set up all the distribution, to get all the port processing, to get the vehicles all homologated, to appointing our distributors, to having them build out their facilities, for us to put an office, hire people, everything. We did that in 5 months. Hugely successful. My management in the States were ecstatic. They couldn't believe it. Success. And I still continued drinking. And my patterns of drinking kept getting more and more and more and more. And in Asia, drinking is a sport. They love to drink. The Koreans love whiskey and Johnny Walker and Friday nights and Saturday nights and Sunday nights and Monday nights and Tuesday nights, and every night they love going out to drink after work. And because I felt like I had to fit their lifestyles and fit their patterns, I went ahead and I did it too. And so, as stupid as it is, I was successful and I was becoming a supreme alcoholic. So, having done pretty well in Korea, I spent about 3 years there. My boss comes to me and he says, John, you did pretty good. We want you to go over to Tokyo. We want you to run the Asia Pacific region for Ford. So essentially that amounted to all the what we call new and emerging markets. So I had responsibility for all of Asia Pacific, and at that point in time, Ford had kind of given up in those areas, those countries, going back to the 80s, because, in the 80s we were about to go bankrupt, so we couldn't manage all these markets and still worry about the home front in Europe and Mexico and some of the other major countries. So we had not really engaged those markets for years. So my assignment was to go out and go find where our distributors were in those countries, and that's what I did for the next 3 years, and I did pretty well. And so lo and behold, I got to know all of our distributors in places like Papua New Guinea and Singapore and Fiji, Tahiti, Vietnam, Malaysia, etc., etc. So I got to see the world on Ford's dime, and amazingly enough, a lot of those countries, drinking was a lifestyle. And so it just everywhere I went, my drinking pattern followed me. It was almost like God was putting me down this path, and I had no idea why. And it created a monster inside of me that I wasn't prepared for. I became very self-centered because I thought I was good. I knew what I was doing. I became very focused on how people thought about me, I became very controlling because I thought I knew all the right answers in life, because I was doing so well that, in fact, if somebody were to ask me if somebody would tell me what they thought, I would just dust it off because I had the right answers. So then Ford sent me, let's see, where's the next stop? So I'm not going to go into each of the individual territories because we probably don't have time, and that's not the point. But Ford sent me to the Middle East. They sent me to I managed Caribbean, Latin America. I managed Africa, and probably someplace else between, doing the same kind of job. In each of those locations, I basically developed a stronger and stronger drinking habit, okay? So I got down to South Africa, and this was at the end of my career. And I was managing everything north of South Africa for Ford. And, personally I enjoyed it. I had a good time seeing all of that. But I could really feel a lot of discontent in my life. I had achieved things, but I wasn't personally happy in my life. So I thought retirement was the thing that was going to make me happy. And so I talked to Catherine. I said, look, let's kind of call it a day. I had 30 years with Ford. And she acknowledged that. She said, okay, let's do it. Let's go do something. The thing that my wife was convinced about was that my stress in business was what was driving me to drink. She thought that if I were to retire, I wouldn't have so much stress in my life and that I'd probably not drink as much anymore. The real story is, so I retired. We moved to Southern Pines, and we engaged the community. We loved this community very much. I got very involved in a lot of different organizations, the Sunrise, Weymouth, the Center, the Arts Council, and man, oh man, my drinking patterns just went out of control. At some point, my obsession, all I could think about was where I was going to get that next drink. And I moved on from just having a bottle of wine at night to where, the amazing thing is about an obsession. Somebody said in the early meetings that they don't think about broccoli all the time, right? They don't hide broccoli around the house so they can sneak out and go grab a snack on broccoli, But alcohol, my obsession for alcohol caused me to have a strong desire to have a drink at ridiculous times. It is the insanity of alcohol that will cause you to pretend to be sleeping until your wife's asleep so you can sneak downstairs and pick out the bottle of liquor that's hidden inside your car just to have a quick shot so you can get up to bed and so you can maybe go to sleep. My physical body was a mess. I was up to over 200 pounds. I shaked, right? And I just had no control over my life. So my decision was, John, you need to start a business. So I started a small consulting company, and that was the worst thing I ever did. I traveled. And if you're an alcoholic and you travel, the business lounge is where you want to go. And then after work, the hotel is where you want to go. And so my drinking patterns were just insane. And finally it got to a point where one night, no, I take that back. So finally it got to a point, the obsession was so bad, I just couldn't think about anything else but having the next drink. I would sneak out of the house and have an excuse to go down to Harris Teeter to grab some eggs and go to their bar and have a couple drinks. Everything was about alcohol. So one Sunday, I got a trip to go up to Detroit. I head up to the airport. I go to the business lounge. I'm up in the business lounge. I'm having a couple drinks. The next thing I do is I wake up. I'm in the hospital with 2 police officers in front of the door, and I'm like, what is going on? So I go up to them, I say, hey, I got to make a trip to Detroit. I got business up there. You don't understand. This is important. I got to get out of here. And they go, buddy, you're going to be here for a couple hours until you get settled down. And they said, you've been kind of misbehaving, and you need to spend some time in here until you get a couple more hours. So anyway, so I stuck it out. I just said, and all I could think about is I got to get to Detroit. I got to get to Detroit. I got to get to Detroit. And so after 2 hours, I signed the papers. I got out. I had no idea what I did. But all I could think about was getting to Detroit. But first, before I get to Detroit, I need to get back to that business lounge and wait up there until I can catch my plane. So I get back up to the business lounge. I don't even know what's going on up there. I get the evil eye from the people in the little sign-in desk. I have a couple drinks, and the next thing I know, a taxi cab's dropping me off in front of my house at 2 a.m. My wife opens the door, and she's furious, and all I can think about was, I got to get to Detroit. So 2:30 in the morning, I'm on the phone. I'm trying to book a flight. I successfully get a flight for the next morning because I got a meeting pretty early in the morning, which I know I'm not going to make, but I'm going to try to make it nonetheless. Hopefully I have a good excuse. I get to the airport. I get on the plane. I get to Detroit. I am shaking, right? I'm sweating. I'm feeling terrible. I end up going to the, not the emergency room, urgent care. And urgent care puts me in an ambulance and sends me to the hospital. 2 days in a row, I'm in the hospital. So they give me fluids. They say, son, you need to stop drinking. That's basically was the message. And that was my problem. I get through the rest of the week. I'm drinking at the bar at night. I'm thinking about alcohol. I got the obsession. It's crazy. My life's out of control. I get home that Friday night, and my wife says, John, you want to go to an AA meeting? And I say yes. And that's when the first seed of hope came into my life, right? So I make that meeting, but it takes about a year of going to meetings before I finally lose that obsession. And I remember I was down in Atlanta. I was, I would go to meetings and I'd be sober for about a week or a month. And that damn obsession would just cause me to have another drink. And I couldn't shake it. Always I was thinking about getting a drink. But I tried. I was just using willpower to try to stay sober. Right? I had a sponsor, but he unfortunately blew up. He called me I had him for about 2 months, and he called me one night and he said, John, I'm going to go back into rehab. So I said, oh, wow, that's not good. So then I just figured I'd go sponsorless. And so I went sponsorless for that rest of that year, but for some reason in February, in a hotel in Atlanta, I was at the bar one night, I had some drinks, I went to bed, I woke up the next day, and that obsession was gone. And I don't know what it was, but it was gone. And I just am thankful to God that obsession is gone. But my problem was, I still like to smoke marijuana. So I'm going to make this short. So for about 2 more years, I didn't drink, but I did continue to get high, and I got high a lot. In fact, what I had done, in my genius way of thinking, is I substituted alcohol with marijuana. So I came to the meetings. I'd always come late, and I'd always leave early because I didn't want to engage anybody in that room. I figured if I just went to the meetings, that it would come to me, right? Something would happen to me, it would come to me. And it didn't. And so finally, after about 2.5 years of doing that, and I was high a lot, and it was costing a lot of money, but it just seemed like I had it going on. I had to figure it out. I was going to AA. It's AA. It's not okay. It's got to be okay. But it wasn't, because I was doing the same exact things I was doing an alcoholic. I had the same discomfort that I had as I was an alcoholic. I was still an alcoholic. I was just finding another source for my alcohol or a replacement for my alcohol. So finally one day on a Sunday, I was just tired. I was tired of what I was doing, how I felt. Everything about my life I said was wrong. I put all this crap in a bag. I went to a gas station. I threw it away. The next morning I went into a meeting. The one person that I really liked in the room, Michael, he's the most humble person I ever met. I walked up to him. I said, Michael, will you be my sponsor? I'll do anything I can to become a sober person. And he said, and I explained to him my story. And he said, yeah, John, I'll do it. And that was the day I embraced the principles of AA. And I said, I want to be a sober person. And I'm thankful to God that He opened that door to me, because that's when my heart finally changed. I had the blessing of losing that obsession, all right? But I still didn't take advantage of it to become a sober person. But something happened to me on that day, back on May 14th, that I said, God, I'm done. I need to change my life. My relationship with my wife was not what it should be. My isolation was growing worse. Everything about my life was saying, John, you're an alcoholic. You're just not drinking alcohol. So I finally put it in a bag. I talked to Michael. I said, I want to do this. And he said, you got to do the work. And that was the difference in anything and everything I did in AA. I never did the work. And that's when I started doing it. I started with the first step, and then I did the second, then I did the third, and then the fourth scared the crap out of me. The fifth scared the crap out of me even more. But the amazing thing is when I did that fifth step, that was what got me through the gate. That's what pushed me to be able to do the next 7 steps. So what has that done in my life? Well, it's allowed me to be truly a sober person. And that word sobriety means more than just stopping drinking and stopping using marijuana. It means taking on a spiritual component to my life that I never knew before. I had gone to church. I had believed in God, right? I had said the prayers. I had done all the rituals. But I never really truly had a relationship with God. And to me, that is as important to me, that relationship with God, as my sobriety. And I fear losing that worse even than I fear losing my sobriety. Because I think that is what keeps me sober, that relationship with God. So one of the things I want to talk about, I never thought I could talk this long, but is talk about relationships. One of the things that somebody mentioned to me, and I don't think it was my sponsor, it might have been Barry, mentioned to me when I first really, I used to sit in the back of the room, right? That was my safe place. Come late, in the back of the room, get out early. Boop, I was safe. He said, John, it's about relationships. You need to come up to the front of the room. Aha, it's about relationships. So one of the first things I did, nobody told me to do this, because you go to a meeting, you say hello to people, goodbye, hello, what's going on, how's your life, I had to get to know people in more detail. I needed to hear their story. I need to share. So I started just randomly asking people to go to breakfast with me and sit down with me, and I would just tell my story, as stupid as it was, as whatever. I would just tell, and then they would share their story, and I got better. And I'd get another person, and we'd share stories. And one-on-one, time and time again, I started building relationships in AA. And I started feeling a lot better about myself because I found out, and it's just no big. Everybody knows this. We're alike. We may be a little bit different. Our life patterns may be different, but at the end of the day, we're almost the same thing underneath. We're alcoholics. We lived a life of desperation and misery. We found AA. We did the work. And we live in a light that is incredibly a blessing, and I'm just very happy. But it's about relationships. So one of the things I understand about relationships that I have understood is that in a relationship, if I want to change that other person around me, I need to change myself. And I found that out in my wife, in my relationship with my wife. I had been this alcoholic for 30 plus years with her. This is all she knew. And so all of her behavior patterns toward me was based on me being an alcoholic. So when she had to tell me something 4 times and it irritated me, that wasn't her fault. That was me. So I soon started to realize, God, man, it's important that as I changed myself, my wife, Catherine, changed toward me. And that was very powerful. And today, we have the best relationship we've ever had in our lives. We love each other intensely. We share conversations that we've never shared in the last 30 years. We're friends. And that's been the most important change to me in this AA process is my relationship with my wife. because I deprived her of so much in all those 30 years that I owe it to her to make. That is my number one amends. And it's not just that I'm sorry. It's a living amends that's meaningful to me, and it's meaningful to her. And that's enormously important. But also it was about relationships with my other friends. And I've made friends in AA that are more than just superficial. What car do you drive? This is the job I had. It's about real bonding and real spiritual alignment. And it's amazing to sit down with somebody and talk about something other than just football or golf or something, but to have a conversation about have a spiritual discussion with somebody. And that is one of the more enriching things that I found in AA, is to have that kind of discussion really enhances my life. The other part of AA that's been important to me is service. And I need to do more, and I'm working in that direction to try to do more. But what I found, one of the things that I did early on in my sobriety is some guys were going out to the Richmond County Prison, to the minimum security out there, and I thought that'd be pretty cool, right? And but what I found out when I went out there was these guys that are in, a lot of these guys are incarcerated for life. Even in minimum security, they just happen to have worked their way down to minimum security. They are there for life. And these 12 or 15 guys that used to show up to the meeting have more freedom and more interpersonal well-being than I can ever imagine. And yet they're confined in these little tiny cells. Their capacity to interact with the outside world is zero. And yet they taught me more about what it is to live than I knew it up until that point. And the act of service, what I thought I was going to bring to them, they brought back to me tenfold. And that's what I found in service. I'm trying to get over to the detox group and work with them. But I think that's another important aspect of my sobriety, is that it's not about me. It's about what I can do for that next person. And when I do something for that next person, it comes back to me. And I hate it when I expect something to come back now, because it's so frustrating, and I don't like that sensation. But when I don't have that expectation of getting something back, and I just do something purely because it's the right thing to do, it's an amazing feeling. I remember Mark Christopher in our group tells a story. One time he was cleaning the floors at his house, and he's very irritated, because he had to be cleaning the floors, and his wife didn't appreciate it, and he was just upset about it. And apparently he talked to his sponsor, and his sponsor made the point, "You walk on those floors too, don't you?" Well, that's true. I walk on those floors too. And I have good fortune in life, and I have a responsibility to share that with other people. And let me see what else I got here. Hopefully... Well, I've talked about the importance of spiritual life, and the one thing that I did want to bring about is I read a great book. It's called The Spirituality of Imperfection. I've read two great books in my time in sobriety. One is Emmett Fox's Sermon on the Mount. That opened my eyes to the real relationship with God. It's a real blessing to read, Jesus's sort of words and how he expressed them, and the sort of deeper meaning of what he had to say. But then, and that really opened my eyes up to my spiritual relation. And I tell you that the lifting that you get when you feel that connection to God, when you first feel it, you almost levitate. It's so powerful. But another book that I've read that I think is very important is called The Spirituality of Imperfection. I think his name is Kuntz that wrote it. And the one thing I learned in there that's really meaningful to me, it's in sort of our literature, but it's about progress. And it's not so much that we need to make progress, but it's that as human beings, we are not perfect. And to try to be perfect is a big mistake, because you'll never be happy about it. But it is about progress. But the point being is that point of progress is to a goal which is never going to recede in life. That goal is never going to come any closer to me. And I may not make huge strides at any one point in time, but even if I just keep trying, even when I fail sometimes, what I learn from my failure is I'm still making progress. And that's principally my goal in life, is to always continue to try to make progress. Because as a sober person, that's the only direction I can go. I have no going any other way, going any other direction except forward. And I tell you, man, I've gone through some stuff lately in my life. I've taken, one of the things I've done, I'm always trying to do something more because I want the challenge in my sobriety. So I decided, I've been retired and I hadn't been working, and I said, John, you need to get a job. So I took on a job. Man, oh man, the challenges in taking on a job, I know that sounds stupid, but it isn't, I've gone back to when I used to work, and all the things that keep you up at night, 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm thinking about all the things I got to get done the next day. And you know what I think? That is an absolute blessing. It gives me great inspiration to have those challenges. Because if I didn't, then I probably wouldn't be progressing in life. So that's kind of my story. I hope it made some sense to some people. I guess I'm just blessed. I'm blessed with the people in this room. I'm blessed that I found a solution. I found hope. And I pray to God I never lose it, because I always thought the kids that are coming into AA, when I first came in and early in their lives, I go, oh man, poor guys, man, they're going to give up all that fun that they potentially could have had. What an idiot. I am so happy in my life. I am so inspired by some of the simplest things. I am blessed by God. I'm blessed by the people in this room. And I'm blessed by my wife, who stood by me all these years. I'm thankful to Harris for giving me the chance to talk tonight, because this has helped me a lot. Hope it hasn't bored you too much. But anyway, I'm very grateful to be an alcoholic and to be a sober alcoholic. Thank you very much.